with the Common App, which is obviously the US way of applying. So you can personalize the Common App a little bit more. So you've got multiple essays. The process is a little bit more holistic because you see that liberal style of education prominent in the US. The UK is subject first because in most of the UK you would be applying for a particular subject, and so obviously the UCAS is more structured towards that kind of a application system. So it's five, applications as we mentioned, and it's all about the subject really. The focus is on that, and so that's the way the system is structure. Can't really personalize it to the university. So it's important to know you have to keep it quite broad. You can obviously talk about the subject area, but stay away from mentioning example because the same information goes to all five of your choices. So so I think it's also great. I always say, for example, looking at studying history with economics. There's so many different choices, institutions. So you can actually use a search tool on the UCAS if you're not sure of what the requirements are. You have that ability to filter through the choices that you may want to make. And then there's also some really good information on personal statements and studying in the UK. So I think it's a very comprehensive website, and also kept very simple, so it's not very complicated. It's got, very simple four parts, largely your grades, your personal information, um, one personal statement, and then, the reference. So it's kept quite streamlined. And then, there may be some universities, Durham, obviously, I think you also got the TMUA for some subjects now. So some exceptions obviously there, but generally it's quite a simple process and the same application goes to everyone. So it's cost effective, it's quite simple, and it doesn't take as much time as personalizing and tweaking information for the Common App.
Thank you for that. Um, so is UCAS the only way to apply to UK universities, or do some universities like yours accept direct applications?
Um, so I'll speak from a St. Andrews perspective. We do have a direct application and we're on the Common App, but I think it's important maximum of five criteria. So if you are looking to apply through the Common App, make sure your five choices are on the Common App. If you're applying direct, that's normally meant for students who only may be applying to us in the UK. But if you're applying to multiple places, then UCAS is the way you need to apply. And it's such a simple process. You don't get any preference applying directly. It's equal for everyone. And the prompt that we give you for the Common App, for example, is very similar to the personal statement. So again, just reiterating, you still need to only apply to five, only if you're looking at us, or if it's easier, you're applying to the US, you just want to add one more on the Common App, it's easier for you, then of course that option is there. But otherwise, I would say UCAS is the way most students apply, and I would say it's probably the way you should be applying if you're looking at more choices in the UK.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that. So in terms of if universities accept applications only directly through UCAS, so most Russell Group universities actually do only accept applications through UCAS. And only speaking from Durham's perspective, we also only accept applications through UCAS. We do not accept direct applications. So like we mentioned, just to kind of make it streamlined, just to make it easier for you, and just to kind of make it easier for you to also track your application, it is always much more advisable if you apply directly through UCAS, because then it's easier for you to apply to multiple universities, track your application, and also just send across one set of documents. So applications mostly for most universities will have to be through UCAS. Very few do accept directly, but you'll have to check on individual as to how they're accepting those admissions or applications.
Right. So thank you. So Veer had mentioned that there are three main components to UCAS. One is the grades, the personal statement, and references. How would you rank these in terms of importance?
Go for it, Savi.
Okay, so if I have to talk about my perspective and, just from Darren's perspective or other Russell Group universities that I see around myself, I think all three are equally important or as important as each other. So of course, I mean, at the first stage, we will filter our students on the basis of their academic requirements. So you definitely have to meet that. but I've seen students at Durham with 99% get rejected because their personal statement was not up to the mark. So, that plays an equally important role. And of course, LORs or letter of references are also equally important. And most universities would prefer students to put these across to their academic teachers rather than general counselors or school principals, because these academic teachers can then talk about their attitude, aptitude about the program. See, for an admission officer, your application is our only way to basically know you. They've not spoken to you, they've not met you, they might have 5 different applicants with the same kind of credentials and profile. Your personal statement, your letter of recommendation is what sets you aside. So if I have to kind of rank them, I think they're all equally important. But that's my perception about things. Be over to you.
No, I agree. I mean, there's a reason why it's there in the application. But obviously, I just always say in the UK, it is academics first. So, it is your grades. If you don't meet the standard requirements, and the UK is very clear, it's not as subjective and holistic as the US. So it is very clear you'll have either a minimum entry requirement or a standard entry requirement mentioned for most boards. So Indian boards will be mentioned. You'll always have the IB, you'll have the A levels. So look at that, and then you know where you stand. That's going to be sort of the standard requirement. So you need to meet that. If you're not meeting that, then it's maybe go to your college counselor and have a chat and see how you want to strategize. And those five choices, one's a reach, one's a safety option. And then you can sort of strategize accordingly. I would say the next obviously is the personal statement. And if you've got a university that's interviewing or taking other tests, then of course those also play a part. So some universities that do interviews, maybe the interview may be a percentage of the process, or an aptitude test or so on. But generally, for most UK universities, you don't have that. So you will have the personal statement, which is important, and it really needs to be sort of academic and subject focused. So again, because at my time I had done sort of bunch of US applications where you were writing about identity, which are non-academic related, you do have to keep it quite academic and subject first when it comes to the person statement. So I would say those two are the most important factors. And the referee is actually quite important if there's circumstances you want to mention. So, I always give an example and say, let's say someone has a big dip in the grades in the 11th grade. Is there some substance to talk about in the referee sort of note to say, okay, this happened because of a reason, or the student moved from CBSE to IB? Is there some context that the referee can give us? So those kind of things then become quite important there. So I would always say, don't look at hierarchy for the referee. If it's coming from a principal, it doesn't matter. It's someone who knows the student, can talk about individual aspects and strengths and weaknesses, and that's probably makes for a better referee than someone who doesn't know the student in that sense. So yeah, I think that's the priority I would give to it. There's no doubt that requirements there's obviously really important.
Yeah, I
Right.
just add one point about the academic part which Veer and Sabi mentioned. UK is very transparent, unlike the US. Everything is very, very clearly spelled out. What's the minimum grade required? What are the subjects that are required? Subjects which are preferred, subjects which are not preferred. So it becomes very, very important to also choose your subjects in grade 9 and 10 if you're doing the international curriculum. If you're doing the Indian curriculum, mostly subject choices happen in grade 11. So choose your subjects very wisely. If all subjects are equally preferred, then look at the subjects where you can score well in, because your grades become important. It's very important to know that minimum requirements means parents and students drive me up the wall saying we've got an 87, it's almost 90, in the end we will get 90, can we please apply? And we go back to reminding them that that's the minimum. So most kids sometimes will be getting an offer at grades higher than that. They're already accounting for a slight dip that you could have or giving you a little bit of concession, and hence what you see on the website is minimum. So say St. Andrews mentions 90% minimum, it's unlikely that at 85% predicted scores they will make you an offer. You must aim for a 93 or a 94 or a 92, and a fairly competitive chance of making it through, provided the other things on your application are fairly. Later on, once you get in, sometimes colleges could make a slight negotiation on your offer by 1%, 2% here and there, depending upon how many students have confirmed to that college and how many more seats they have. But at the time when you apply, you've got to have grades which are slightly above that minimum requirement, keeping that margin for yourself. That's the one point that I
No,
want to
it's a very valid point. And again, because going back to my point about that the UK generally, of course, is a little bit more rigid. So that's why we have some subject specific requirements. So a lot of, just to add to you, a lot of students come to me and say, well, I've got a 99, but I've missed uh, the 90 in math. You're still not meeting requirements if that was your condition. So overall scores are important, and then subject wise conditions are also important. So you need to meet both in that sense.
Right. Thank you for that. So, coming to the personal statement, which is, I guess, arguably one of the most important factors of the application, UCAS this year has changed the structure of the personal statement.
add.
Can you talk about how the new structure differs from the old one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. So someone's unmuted. But it's a free flowing essay. Now what the UCAS has done is that it's structured the personal statement into three very specific questions. So the first question is about your motivation and interest for the subject. The second is more about your academic qualifications and how you've prepared. And then the last is a little bit more to do with sort of your experiences and so on. So of course you can look through the exact wording of the questions, but they've broken it into three parts. Now what's quite interesting is if you ask me as someone who's read applications, what they expect, actually I'm expecting something very similar. I'm still looking for, subject first at motivation. So I actually think what this breakdown into questions has done is it's made it quite fair across the board. Earlier, if you had a chance to talk to me or a counselor or someone at school, maybe they'd give you this advice. But someone who didn't have that advice, maybe they won't know what to write about. Whereas now with the pointed questions, it's actually made it fair for everyone. Everyone has a sort of more clarity over what kind of topics they might want to cover. But I would always say, even in the free flowing essay, it should be 70% about your subject, academically written, research, reading, reflective, and then maybe, 20-25% can be extracurricular. It can be about your leadership. It can be sports, all that stuff. And I would say the way they've structured the current three questions, it still lends itself fairly similar to the content in that sense. And the split is also similar. But that's the difference. So now instead of a free-flowing essay, now you obviously have to answer the prompts, and the minimum for each prompt is about 350. The questions you're answering, it's just now it's broken it up into three questions.
Just to kind of add to that, so I think we've broadly covered what are the changes for this year's, personal statement. So yes, from a free-flowing essay, it's just been moved into three structured questions. So the content of the personal statement still remains the same. It's just that how you frame them and structure them, that's changed slightly. So the three questions also, like we mentioned, are broadly surrounded around, why do you want to study the particular subject of the course? So UK is majorly subject focused. So like we mentioned, 70 to 80% of your personal statement is supposed to talk about why are you really interested in that subject and everything that you've done in order to inculcate that interest or to pursue that interest. And, what super curriculars you've done. So the UK typically does not look at extracurriculars like the US does, but what it looks at is super curriculars. And your super curriculars are going to be additional things that you've done outside of your actual academics, outside of your school, to again, kind of process and to kind of, um, to kind of build up on your interest for the particular subject. So, for example, if you're really interested in something like law, you've done MUNs, you've done any kind of debates, those are the kind of things, or you're interested in international relations, you've done some kind of charity work, some kind of volunteering. If you're interested in computer science, you've done some kind of online certifications, robotic programs, competitions. So, so they kind of talk about and kind of tie back to your interest in the subject. So that is what typically UK is looking for. So yes, the first question is broadly around, your focus for in terms of your motivation towards the subject and why do you want to study that subject? How did your interest generate? How did you get that spark for that particular subject? The second question definitely again highlights, your qualifications and what are you studying in order to, kind of work on that particular interest. So it talks about your school qualifications, your academic achievements, any projects that you've done in school. And then also additionally, what you've done outside of school is the third question. So that's where you highlight your, super curriculars, any work experience, volunteering, any hobbies also. If you are able to relate them back to your interest in the subject, you can highlight in that. One question that I've been getting off late quite often is regarding talking about APs and SATs and their personal statements. So I think if I'm not wrong, 95% of the UK universities do not ask for SATs, right? So we don't necessarily need SATs, but in case if you've got that score, any additional information is only going to add to your profile. It's not going to take away from your profile, right? Similarly, if you've got a good AP score, don't waste too much space because you only have 4,000 characters, right? So utilize the space judiciously. So talk about your APs maybe in one line that this was my AP scores, this was my SAT scores, a complete detailed breakup of your APs or SATs. But yes, you can use the personal statement to highlight those scores as well if you think you've done exceptionally well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Savi. That was a great distinction between extracurricular and supercurricular, which I think we should all keep in mind. Coming to extracurriculars, supposedly there's a student who has, unrelated extracurriculars, like they pursue a sport or a musical instrument. Should they then include this in the personal statement at all or not?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. I'll probably uh, share my perception or my take on this, and then we please feel free to contribute. So, in terms of sports or additional hobbies, like I said, 80% of the personal statement is supposed to talk about your interest in the subject. 20% you can talk about all of these holistic things, but typically UK universities prefer how you tie back your interest also in your hobbies and everything to your interest in the subject. So, for example, if you're talking about something like sports and students applying for a course, maybe business and management, for example, right? When you are playing a team sports, you have to show leadership skills, right? You have to show tenacity. You have to show, you have to be very determined. You have to be very disciplined, things that if you want to become an entrepreneur, you also have to do. You have to run a team, you have to work with so many different people, you have to work as part of a big group, you have to be leader. These are the kind of things that you can learn from sports, for example. I did have, some time back, somebody, shared this example with me of a student who'd applied for medicine. So it's a very, very strange example, but I think it's very relevant in this context, for students to understand. So the student had applied for medicine, had a very, very keen interest towards baking. And how did they relate the interest of baking and medicine together was that while you bake, you have to also dress up the cake, right? So you have to apply fondant. And for that, you need to have a very stable hand. You need to have a lot of patience. And that's exactly the skills you also require to have when you're performing surgery, a stable hand and patience. So thinking, where you're talking about your interest or passion about something, but you're also able to relate back, what have you really drawn out of that particular, hobby? So we're not looking at that, I did 10 things or I did 20 things. We're looking at maybe those one or two things that you've done exceptionally well and what really has been your takeaway. And how does that inculcate with your interest in the particular subject? What kind of quality or what kind of, takeaway from that particular passion can you relate back to your interest in the subject? So that's ideally what we're looking at.
Thank you. Veer,
No,
sir,
I
would you
think
like to add anything?
I think you've really covered most of it. So I don't think there's much more to add. Um, the only thing I would add is that there's two types of skills. So there's subject specific skills. So you can always relate things back to the subject. And if you can't do that, then you can try and relate it to transferable skills, which are obviously important in any classroom. But I think it just comes back to a general point I would always remind people is remember, this is a personal statement. This is not a CV. So, if you're just mentioning it like, one line that I'm the captain or I'm this or that, that doesn't come across the same way if you can build on it a little bit and connect it. It's at the end of the day, it is a personal statement. It's not a cover letter for a job. So I think if you go with that approach, then you'll start to make more connections, not just for your extracurricular, but even the directly related activities, you'll be able to connect them better.
Yeah. I'll also add something to what both of them have said. Very good points made by both Veer and Savi. Picking up what Veer said about it's not a CV, very important. I do remind almost half my students that it's okay to exclude 30, 40, up to 50% of the activities that you've done. Not everything that you've done needs to be out there on your statement. Focus on quality and not quantity. So if you've done 5 sports and you can only talk about one, or you can't talk about either one of them, not even a single one, and you're talking about everything else, that's absolutely fine. Pick up the most relevant activities and talk about them at length. And then should you be doing those or not? If those are not going into your statement, again, I tell them that uh, the whole college counseling and profile building journey is building those transferable skills which are going to help you at university. Again, what Veer said. So not being able to mention everything in the personal statement does not translate into futility of those activities. It's still helping you out in some way or the other, not as explicitly as something which is also being mentioned on the statement directly for the course. So that's something that I took back from Veer that I wanted to remind the audience. And something to what Savi said, yes, I love the analogy, Savi, that you brought about baking and medicine, and now more so, I think, in the revised personal statement format. So while we already spoke about it in the beginning, about when he was talking about the 3 sections of the personal statement, I'll quickly take you to the 3 new now. As opposed to being one letter, it's 3 questions, as we said. So what are those 3 questions? Question 1 is, why do you want to study this course or subject? So very, very subject specific. Question 2 is, how have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course or subject? So now let's pick up something like medicine, what Savi said. Now, why do you want to study this course or subject? I mean, you can very fleetingly here talk about the analogy of the baking and this thing that, yes, you loved doing this and you were very good at it, and hence probably, but still not, it's not really a burning desire for you just because you were so good at cooking, you want to study medicine. So the focus has to be more on uh, biology, biomedical sciences, chemistry, research. Those are the specific theories within the realm of medicine that you studied. You should talk about that. Second, how have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course or subject? Here, you specifically talk about the modules you studied in school, about the courses that you've done, uh, and the research work and projects you've done within the context of that subject or complementary disciplines, how that furthers your motivation behind that. Now, the third question is, what else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? So this is, I think, the third question is where you can really talk about a little bit of extracurriculars and supercurriculars to show the connection between what you've done and what may seem distantly related, but you can still draw some leverage, some of the skills you've gained in that activity. So this is here where I would like to talk about my love for baking and how adept I am at that particular activity and how I can utilize the learnings from that into medicine later on. So if somebody's a stellar sports person, but you're applying for business management, you can actually talk about, say, if you've participated in 40 tournaments, say how you were so dedicated towards that one activity of cricket or football, how you were getting up early and going for every tournament out there, and at the same time managing your grades. And this is a skill that is required even as a student of business at a competitive university, or later when you're running empires, how hustling across different things is something that comes so naturally to you because of that. So this is where subtly you can talk about the other things. If you've done music up till grade 8, Trinity exams, while not everybody goes up till grade 8. So that definitely shows dedication. You can definitely talk about it. But just saying that I play the piano, I love the piano is not good enough. Again, mentioning, citing what we had mentioned. So yes, you can talk about extracurriculars, but to drawing connection in the best possible manner and not just stating it, but correlating it is very, very important in the third question of the UCAS.
But it's also, so just to add, I think it's all great points. It's also says a lot when you're consistent. So I think something you said was really important is, should I continue or not? I would always say, if you like something, please continue with it. Doing 5 years of music without saying anything shows discipline, it shows motivation, it shows that you can carry forward an activity, you don't give up easily. So even that, whereas if you say, okay, I played the guitar for 2 weeks, that's not really saying much. So, if you're doing something for a long period of time and you're passionate about it, don't do it just for the person statement, but always continue that. It'll teach you a lot more in the long run beyond the person statement. And it'll say a lot more in your person statement if you decide to put it in also.
Just to add one more point to this, I think that's a very, very valid point that, if you have an interest and passion towards something, and even if you can't put it in your personal statement, do continue with it. Most universities in the UK have clubs and societies, and they encourage you to participate in those clubs and societies and pursue their hobby, pursue your hobbies, pursue your interests. So that's, I mean, of course, when it comes to personal statement, we are looking at a more subjective outlook. But then when you come into the university, we're looking at students having a more holistic experience. So you will have an opportunity to, continue your interest in sports, interest in music, interest in any particular domain that you might be interested in. And always remember that a personal statement is just an outlook of what you are trying to do in terms of your subject interest and what you want to apply for. And anything that you're doing additionally is not just going to look good on your personal statement, but it's also a skill and a knowledge that you've acquired for yourself. So even if you can't put it on a personal statement, at least it's something that you've learned, and that's going to eventually help you, if not in your personal statement, but in some other way. So yes, please continue with your interest and skills.
Right, that's some good motivation for continuing activities there. So, Veer sir and Savi, just in a quick way, can you tell us the biggest red flag you have seen in personal statement?
I mean, there's some very obvious ones, like someone's mentioning, I want to go to this university. And then obviously the other four don't like them. But on a more maybe less obvious one, some people apply for joint degrees and don't spend enough time talking about one subject, or don't find the common threads between the two subjects. So then at St. Andrews, for example, both departments have to look at your application. So, one may like it, but the other is like, they're not really talking about this subject, and then you get a rejection. So, there's some very, very straightforward ones, like I said, mentioning subjects or talking about a specialization we don't have, or, things like that. But I think at a slightly more nuanced level, I think there are some cases where if you haven't done your research or you don't talk about subjects or you're talking about politics and we do international relations, there's a difference between the two. So I think those kind of things are a little bit more it's not that the student isn't smart or the student isn't taking care, but sometimes they just don't pay attention to the smaller details.
Sorry, yeah, just a few more red flags that, I've also had an opportunity to look at. So, the first would be wherein students start their SOP with something very generic, those generic cliches. Like, ever since I was born, I always wanted to be an astronaut. Or, because my parents are doctors, so I've always
Yeah.
wanted to be a doctor. So don't start your personal statement with generic cliches like that, They're too vague, firstly. Then don't put too many irrelevant details, So like we said, it has to be structured. You only have 4,000 characters. So utilize the space more judiciously. Don't talk about your academic scores because you've already sent across your academic documents to us. We have an input in terms of what your scores are, what you've done so far. So please don't waste that space talking about, your scores, your 12th grades, your 10th grades. Don't use very casual language while you're writing your SOP, because I've seen students saying that, I thought this was cool, so I thought I'd also try this. Don't put that, please. It has to be very structured, it has to be formal. So make sure that, there's some thought process that's going into when you're writing your personal statement. Make sure there are no spelling or grammatical errors. That's also a big red flag for UK universities. And one thing that's very, very, popular these days is, of course, ChatGPT. ChatGPT is definitely our friend, and we can't take away the fact that a lot of students would be using ChatGPT to, take some kind of structure, take some kind of reference from from ChatGPT for their personal statement. But please, please keep in mind, like everybody said, that it's personal for a reason. It has to talk about you. ChatGPT cannot be you, cannot talk like you, cannot talk about you. So you can use ChatGPT to, kind of figure out what kind of structure you want to put in, maybe put in some ideas, ask it to throw back on to write your personal
But
statement. Universities have tools in place to figure out if it's plagiarized, if you've used ChatGPT. So you have to be smart about it. Another example when it comes to ChatGPT, for example, there was a student who had written their personal statement and they wanted to talk about the Big Bang Theory. But ChatGPT, because it elaborates content, it said massive bang theory. And that's exactly how the student submitted their personal statement. So, that's a big, big red flag. So always please make sure you can use it to, just take reference, but your personal statement has to be personal and has to be written by
yeah, I
you.
would say don't use it at all, because at the end of the day, if you're, I know I put it in a different way, right? If you're not ready to write
Mhm.
4,000 characters, you're really going to struggle at university. So if this is the piece of work that you have to give to a university and you cannot write it yourself, then it really means that, you're going to have a tough time going forward. But I'll just say two things, just remember, something you can search for, anyone can search for. So the lot of references like economics, so many people just quote donut economics or economics because they're the first two books that come up when you search about books for economics. So the minute someone quotes from one of those, are acting on it and using it to contrast different topics, it gives me sort of an idea that obviously this has been a simple Google search. So I think, do that. But at the end of the day, what are we looking for? Why is this person passionate about this subject? And if their passion is so weak that they need to go and Google and go to Chat GPT, then it's not really being passionate about it. So I think, write it as personally as you can and be as honest. We're not looking for a perfect piece of work. We're not looking for something which is perfectly written. It's a personal essay, and I think, that's what it should be.
Fun fact there, when you actually put on Chat GPT, what are the changes to the personal statement from last year to this year, it'll throw you the response that you get to the prompt is that there are 6 questions now in Chat GPT, which is
Yeah.
while there are 3. So that is proof enough that what you get is not always authentic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, I mean, you can go into a lot of detail, but for those who maybe aren't as aware, ChatGPT is actually a closed system. So it's a lot of information there and it's pulling out of that information that it has. So it may be, now it's almost like it's pulling in from what is being fed into it. So someone can feed in wrong information and it'll put out that
Yeah.
kind of a thing to you. So yeah, but it's just being smart about it. Like Savi said, who we can't really like we can't restrict a Google search, people will use it, but make sure that you still don't lose the personal touch and make sure that you know, be as personal in the statement as you can be.
Right. I did have like a whole question regarding AIs, but it's been covered in this question itself. So thanks for clarifying that. My last question on personal statement is, can you share one example of a really strong personal statement, something that stayed with you, even after many years or many weeks, just so that our students know what not to do, they may get some inspiration on what to do.
So I can't remember exactly a personal, I'll tell you the gist of it because what we see or what I see a lot in India is very structured essays. It's always introduction, internship, it's very structured.
Mhm.
So I always, get quite impressed when people actually break that structure. So I've read some personal statements where they're literally talking about how, so it was an international relations kind of a thing. And they were talking about how they spoke about a similar policy and two, three different either scholars or authors actually used spoke about the same policy but from different perspectives. And then the student actually reflected on it to come up with their own thing to say, given my experience working here, I actually found that this particular author spoke about it in a manner which I saw practically when I was working. So I think good evidence of reading, a good personal statement, even without thinking, the person will use the right terminology. They'll talk about subtopics. They'll mention interest coming from different sources, books, documentaries, and then what they did about it. So I think that always stays with me is when there's more reflectivity. A summary will never stay with me, but if you're actually summarizing and then reflecting on that experience, that always, stays with me.
So we've gone through a lot of personal statements. It's very difficult to kind of, pick one or talk about one particular one. But because we're talking about, extracurricular, so just from that perspective, there was this one personal statement that a student had written for the law program. So a student had spoken about, how during their summer internships, during the summer holidays, they've done some kind of internships with some local legal aid centers. And then from that perspective, so they talked about that, they did this internship, and then they spoke about what work they did in that internship, like they worked on some summaries and all of that. And then they kind of spoke about, that through that experience, they were able to strengthen, their skills, their, analytical skills, and, their just general knowledge about the law terminology. And then they were able to relate it back that, because they've learned all of this, how, legal framework work, and, because they really enjoyed working in those legal aid centers, this has kind of reinforced their decision or, their interest or passion towards the subject. So, just, and it was like roughly, I think, 3, 4 lines. But why it was really, really good was because A, it was very specific what they've done. So they've done the legal aid work, they've done the summer internship. And then also spoke about, it was very reflective. The what did they gain out of it? That, they learned a lot about legal language, about analytical skills. And then they were able to again connect it back to the interest in the subject that, this is again kind of, repurposed or, reinvented the interest in the subject. So, something like that, that's how you are ought to approach your super curriculars when you're writing your personal statement.
Thank you. That sounds like a very well thought and well reflected personal statement. All right, so now I want to move on to certain university specific questions. So coming up for St. Andrews offers a flexible 4-year program. Veer sir, can you elaborate on how that works in practice?
Yeah, so I think if you're looking for flexibility in the UK, then obviously Scotland stands out. So there's just under about 20 institutions, universities in Scotland, and we follow the 4-year degree. Each university will have a slightly different way, but the way St. Andrews does it is we obviously admit you for a subject. So everything we spoke about, keeping it subject specific, but we actually allow you to pick 2 more subjects from your faculty or the cross faculty. So, I can give you my own example if that helps. I had studied economics and then I picked up management and philosophy. So, again, that's probably a little bit more difficult to do sort of in the 3-year structured program. So 2 years you can actually try out a few different subjects. So if you're not sure exactly what you want to study, it's a good program for that. And then after 2 years, you decide whether you want to continue with that subject you'd applied for. You might want to change to a joint degree. So you can then use that flexibility. And then third and fourth year, what we call as honors years is when you specialize. So, if you're doing a management program, you might have 25, 30 different specializations ranging from modules in international marketing to fintech to philanthropy. And then there too, you can further then specialize, what you want to do in the subject area. So you're right. Of course, the 4-year degree is quite unique to Scotland in the UK. And if you're looking for that kind of flexibility in the UK context, then Scotland stands out in that sense. So that's just the way we structure the program. And again, I'll just take you back because everything, remember, has a history. So UK in England, you have the A levels. So students already specialize from a school perspective. So they know what they want to study. So the 3-year program works. The Scottish high levels are actually a little bit more like the IB. They're quite broad. So students actually in Scotland study a few more subjects. Therefore, this system works for them because they've not narrowed yet. So they use the first 2 years to narrow and then they know exactly what they want to do. So that's just how the countries have, worked through the education system.
Great, thanks for highlighting that. That's really important. A lot of our students don't know what they want to study even after being in class 12. So it's a great option. St. Andrews and other Scottish universities are a great option. Savi, for you, we know that Durham's law program is very highly ranked. Could you talk a little bit about the program and especially what makes it stand out for Indian students?
Thanks, Akriti, for the question. Okay, so when it comes to law specifically, we are definitely very highly ranked. So as per the QS rankings, we are top 60 in the world. Our law program is one of the very few law programs that's also accredited by the Bar Council of India. So what that basically means for students is that after you've studied LLB at Durham, all you need to do is come back to India. If you want to practice in India, you have to complete a one-year bridging course, and then you can appear for the Bar Council exam, and then you can also practice in India, right? But if you have studied from a university that's not accredited by the Bar Council, you can appear for the Bar Council exam, right? So the idea is that if you're coming to the UK and already starting that degree, might as well do it from a Bar Council accredited, university, so that you're if you want to practice in India, you have that option. Now, with that said, within the UK, we are top two after Cambridge when it comes to graduate employability for law grads. We work very, very closely with the Magic Circle. So your Magic Circle are your top 5 law firms in the UK that have a very strong global presence. They only recruit through a handful of universities, and Durham is one of them. We have lecture halls that are sponsored by the Magic Circle because they want to have an early access to Durham students. Apart from that, very recently, one of the partners from one of these Magic Circle law firms called Allen and Overy has recently retired and is working as a consultant for Durham University graduates to support them and help them with networking and employment opportunities. So that's the kind of additional support that we are providing at the university. But apart from that, I think what really makes our law program stand out is that we're one of the few universities to have moot courts on campus. We've got a very strong MUN team. And we've got small room classroom teaching. So only Oxford, Cambridge, and Durham offer that in the UK, where it's one professor with 3 or 4 students, right? So your entire 3 years of your degree is going to be 3, 4 students against one professor, sharing the thought process, sharing their insights, sharing their views, debating, arguing. And it's usually going to be, of course, a middle-aged person, right? And when you graduate and when you go and apply for your interviews, when you go and apply for different jobs, what you are basically doing is putting across your perception, your viewpoints to another middle-aged person who's probably a partner at the firm. But it's become easier for you because that's exactly what you've done for the entire 3 years of your program. So that small room classroom teaching actually really inculcates that mindset wherein you're able to speak your mind, you're able to share your thoughts, you're able to actually practically reason, and you have that one-on-one communication and understanding with your academics and learn the concepts much more clearly. So I think that really, really is something that makes the law program at Durham stand out.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the Bar Council fact. That's really important.
I
Just
think
a
it's
quick,
very important because a lot of times students go by pure rankings and they'll end up picking up UCL or King's. And both those colleges, as of today, do not have their accreditation with the Bar Council. So it's a very important point, especially for students from India who also want to keep the option of coming back and working in India, especially in the litigation space where you can't get into the court and represent anybody without having the license in place. Yeah.
right. Just a quick follow-up, Savi, since you mentioned small classroom teaching, is that for all subjects or were you mentioning only for law?
It's for most of the subjects. I think 90% of the subjects you have got. So you have the main lectures, then you have electives, and then you have tutorials. And for these tutorials, for 90% of the subjects, it would typically be not more than 5 to 6 or 7 students, with one professor. So of course, depending on how popular one program is, but when it comes to law specifically, we've made it a much smaller cohort. But for courses like business and management, it could be 6 to 7 students with one professor.
Right. Thank you. Veer sir, for you, what does the ideal St. Andrews student look like? And would like for you to touch upon the fact that St. Andrews is a very small town, so may not be meant for everyone. What kind of student do you think will thrive at St. Andrews?
So I think so one, we've done really well in terms of student satisfaction. So I think both Durham, St. Andrews, Oxford, Cambridge, a lot of the ancient universities are not city-based. It's about the clubs, the societies, it's about the students, it's about being able to walk everywhere. It's about being able to go walk down the street, not on knock on your friend's door and say, let's have a coffee. It's about that personalized experience. And much like Durham, we are very small class sizes. So I think St. Andrews is all about the people. St. Andrews students are very motivated and they're quite outgoing because you don't have a city to bank on. So you make your own fun, you make your own events. Students are part of at least three, four different societies. We run one of the biggest fashion shows, student run fashion shows in St. Andrews in Europe. You have CEOs coming, you have, different talks happening. So there's something happening all the time, but everything is very student focused. But I would say the student who thrives is someone who's willing to put themselves out there. It's very difficult to hide in St. Andrews. Classes are small, tutorials are small. You can't, hide and just sit at the back in your class. You will get called out and asked for your opinion. So I think someone who does that, and also someone who does have other interests as well. So you do have your academics, but you also maybe want to play sport, you want to be part of another activity. So I think someone who's quite all rounded in that sense. The only thing I would say is obviously we're not a city. Now there are people who do want to be in a city, and a city has its, benefits as well. So if someone does like that big city life and isn't interested in sort of campus environments, then of course they're not, going to be a good fit for us. So that's what I would say. That's the one student I feel maybe then shouldn't look at us if you want to be in a city. But if you enjoy campus environments, then of course I think St. Andrews offers you a really, really good environment for that. And we've been really at the top of student satisfaction for almost 15 years now, at least a decade. And that just shows there's a lot to do beyond academics consistently over, a decade now.
Absolutely.
I'll
And
add
all the,
what Reed has
yes, sir.
also said from a counselor's perspective. A couple of other kind of students who thrive in St. Andrews, students who want, especially from India, if they're looking at proximity and at the same time flexibility, already a point that has been covered by Veer in his presentation, because most UK universities are very unilateral in their approach. You pick a discipline and you just study everything related to that discipline. You don't get into studying some of the other things, but in St. Andrews for the first 2 years, you can still explore. So if you're looking at American style education, but outside of America, St. Andrews is great ranking, great reputation, royal family of the UK studied there. So many pluses that one can think of. Yes, it's not for an average Indian student who's just looking at chilling. When Veer said you can go and knock at a student's door and say, let's have coffee, he really means it, because at any typical London college, coffee as a beverage does not exist. It's only other beverages. So it's still a college which has got great culture and I would say a lot more grounded. And third, it is rigorous. So a few courses in St. Andrews have the entry requirements 85% at CBSE or ISC and equivalent of that in IB, etc. But that does not mean that the institution, just because students get into looking at the entry requirements and then comparing it to how reputed, say if Imperial is 95 and you're getting into St. Andrews at 85, okay, it's not as good or it's not as rigorous. It's a very rigorous institution. It has been on the Guardian ranking. It was ranked consistently #1 for a few years in the UK, which means that an institution of that stature cannot be frivolous or less rigorous. So you've still got, even if you've gotten into a course which had slightly lower entry requirements, you will have to put in a lot of effort there. It is a very serious, academically oriented institution. So
Yeah, it's divided as per subject really. So in the IB, it's mostly 38. Some one or two subjects maybe at a 36. In the ISC CBSE, it's really about the popularity. So if you're looking at business science, they're all 93 and above. And then there's some niche courses, for example, an anthropology or a art history, which are quite specialized. Students, it's not as popular as some of the others. They may be in a 90 or a little bit less. But I think we made the point earlier, it's very difficult. You might not get in with that. So even if it's a subject that the minimum is 85, realistically, we probably need a little bit higher. But I think, points well made over there. But it depends on the subjects really, So I would say look up the requirements and then obviously it's different for every subject.
Right. Savi, Durham is known for its collegiate system. Could you explain what that is and how does that enrich the student experience?
Definitely, actually. So I think a lot of things that we mentioned are also part of Durham University and Durham University's collegiate system. So only Oxford, Cambridge, and Durham Durham have is halls of residence. So the building that you study in is also the building that you stay in. So for example, if you've gone for a business program, you're only staying in the business school faculty. So at max, you'll know 50 or 100 students who are in your class or in your building or on the same floor. But with Durham, the concept is quite different. So you've got separate faculty buildings, and then you've got 17 different hostels that we call them colleges. It's just a different terminology, but they're hostels that are spread across the entire city. So now Durham again is a small city. It's a complete student city. Its campus. Every fifth or sixth building in the city is a Durham University building. So, every fifth or sixth building in the city is Durham University building. You can walk from one point of the city to another within 35 minutes. We're the only university in the world where you can actually live in an 11th century castle. It's a UNESCO World Heritage City, so there's a lot of research interest. There's a lot of tourism that happens. So it's a very bright and vibrant city. So how the collegiate system really kind of adds to that is you've got these 17 hostels spread across the entire city, out of which 13 are catered. So all your meals are provided, 4 are self-catered. Your colleges are basically for your pastoral services, for your accommodation, for you to have your meals, for you to engage in network with students from 130 different nationalities and from all different faculties. So each hostel would have at least a minimum, and these are across UG, PG, across the board, across nationalities, across courses. So the amount of communication, skill development, networking that you get to do is absolutely unparalleled. No other university offers it in such a holistic way, you know. So I think that's something that really, really stands out. Apart from that, we have, facilities available at the university central level in terms of libraries, gyms, bars, study rooms, all of that. Our hostels have them at individual level. So each hostel also has its own library, has its own gym, has its own music rooms, study rooms, bars. Then apart from that, what also happens is that we also do inter-college competitions or inter-house competitions. So say, for example, a student is really, really interested in football, for example, they don't make it to the university football team. Each hostel also has its own football team. And for students, I usually take the reference of Harry Potter. So if they've seen the Harry
Yeah.
Potter movies, a lot of scenes have actually been shot in Durham and inspired from Durham University. So if you remember, Harry Potter also has those 4 different houses, Gryffindor, Slytherin, and all of that. So it's the exact same concept, but we have 17 of those houses. So at the end of the day, they become like a family for you. You will know at least 500 students, all the students that are there, because there are networking events almost every week that students are participating in. There are inter-house competitions that you're doing. If you also remember Harry Potter and those black gown dinners, that's again inspired from Durham and Oxford. And some of our colleges actually do those black gown dinners also. So you get to have a very, very unique experience. And, a lot of times students have graduated from Durham, and when I've spoken to them about their experience or, how did they feel, or, was it easy? Was it overwhelming? Students will first talk about their college and then talk about Durham and its faculty and its staff. They are still, members of the hostel even after they've graduated. So I think that's the kind of feeling that, being in that hostel, it's like family away from family that inculcates. So I think, it takes away that overwhelming feeling that you're away, you don't have a social life. It takes away that pressure because, there are so many activities that are lined up for you to get you out of your comfort zone, to get you out there and for you to interact and network with other people. I think that makes it much, much easier. And another advantage I think of being in Durham is that Durham is just approximately 10 minutes away from Newcastle, which is a top 5 big city in England. So they kind of get best of both worlds. So they get a student city life in Durham, but if they want to go out and party or something, they can just go to Newcastle, which is just 10 minutes away, and then they can do that also. So I think the host really adds to their overall experience.
Thank you. I was thinking about Harry Potter only when you were mentioning the colleges. All right, so that's it. I'm going to just take two of the audience questions that have come. Sid asks, are there better chances for scholarship or fee waivers when applying early?
For us, no, because we have a deadline for scholarships. You need to apply, and then we look at everyone. So applying early may help in your application, but not for the scholarship. Um, and fee waivers is not something we would do. At an undergrad level, it's the UCAS. You need to pay your UCAS sort of application fee. It's not something generally we would do. We can talk about it if someone emails and has a valid reason, but generally it's not something we would give at an undergrad level.
Right. Even from Durham's perspective, at an undergrad level, there are no fee waivers.
Mm.
In terms of scholarships, we do have, deadlines as well, but there are also some rolling scholarships as well. So after the equal consideration deadline, we will give out a major chunk of scholarships for students who have got it. But then these are merit-based scholarships also. So that's something to take into account. And in case if this is a PG referred question, we also do not give out any application fee waivers. So application fee is mandatory for us, but then it's only for our business courses and it's not for other courses. And apart from that, for PG school, again, scholarships could be on rolling basis, depends on which course you've applied for. But there are also different deadlines for scholarships with us. So you have to adhere to those.
And I'll add one point to the admission consideration for Scottish University, especially St. Andrews. Applying early definitely helps.
Yeah.
I encourage all students to get their applications latest into the system by end of November, sometimes even before. But as far as all other institutions are concerned, leaving St. Andrews and Oxford, Cambridge, where there is a universal deadline of October 15th, every other university, it does not matter whether you apply on the first date when the UCAS application opens or on the last date. Every application is given equal consideration. So just one point for everybody. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to keep, sorry,
Go ahead.
just
Go
to kind
ahead.
of remind, the equal consideration deadline for 2026 intake is slightly earlier than it typically is. So for next year, it's 14th of January. So please bear that in mind, that you have to work on your application, your personal statement, all of your documents a little bit earlier in the cycle. So 14th of January is the equal consideration deadline for next intake.
That's an important point. Last question for the day. It's from Kanchan. There are several degrees that require 2:2 degree for masters, but many students who follow 3 years honors in India, they follow. So are they eligible or evaluated specifically for any programs in your university? I guess they're asking that is 3 years okay, or do you look for 4 years of study at the undergraduate level for masters?
Enough for us if you want to apply for masters. I mean, if you've studied a 3-year degree, you studied a 4-year degree, or in case of law, you studied a 5-year degree, that's good enough for us. Even with the 3-year degree, you would be eligible to apply for a master's program.
Yeah, same for us. Yeah. But 2-2 is normally we don't take in 2-2. So 2-1
Yeah,
would be
it's
kind of the
2-1, yeah.
minimum we
Both
would look.
Durham and St. Andrews.
2-2 is too low for
minimum
us.
is
We would
2-1.
look for 2-1 equivalence. Yeah.
And for the audience, 2-2 is like second division in the Indian system, and 2-1 is like between 2-1 is the upper 2-1. So first class honors in most places is 70%. In some universities, it's 65%. In some 75%. Upper 2-1 is generally 65 to 70% range. And in some places 60 to 70, and then 2-2 becomes lower than 65 or lower than 60%. It could vary from college to college.
Yeah. And we do have that understanding. So we've also, we understand universities differ. But yeah, just saying 2-2, because the question had 2-2 in it. So
Right.
that's not going to be enough. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much to our panelists, Mr. Veer Singh Anand and Ms. Savi Agarwal. Thank you to Punya sir for sharing your valuable insights today. I hope this session has been illuminating for all our students and parents. If you would like to contact the panelists, I will share their contact information via email to all the participants. If you are not currently an EduCoach student and you would like to get college counseling from us, I will be sharing those details as well via email. On behalf of EduCoach, I thank everyone for being here, and we look forward to seeing you in our future webinars. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, Peer and
Have a lovely
Savi.
evening.
Thank you to
Thank you.
everybody who joined the webinar. I'm sure everybody's learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.